All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into what happened after the German election and especially what it means for their economy.
Okay.
We've got this article here, German election aftermath, economic implications and challenges. And
Yeah.
this election had some real surprises, right?
Yeah, it did.
People are kind of worried about how it's all going to shake out, especially since Germany's economy is already kind of shaky.
Yeah.
We're going to look at what happened, who's in charge, or who's trying to be in charge at least,
Right.
and what kind of ripple effects we might be seeing from all this.
Yeah, this is a really crucial time for Germany.
Yeah.
They're officially in a recession.
Yeah.
Their economy shrank
Yeah.
in both 2023 and 2024. So
wow.
back to back.
Back to back.
And then on top of that, you have the election results, which really threw everybody for a loop.
Things got interesting, to say the least.
Yeah.
The center-right CDU won the most votes, but not enough to just govern on their own.
Right.
And then you have the far-right AFD making some pretty big gains.
No.
Almost 21% of the vote, which is a pretty big jump.
That's right. Yeah. The AFD surge really did shake things up, and
Yeah.
it really makes it a lot harder to form a coalition government.
So it's like a big political jigsaw puzzle with some pieces that just don't want to fit.
Exactly.
So how does this coalition puzzle actually work?
Well, the big thing is that none of the other parties want to work with the AFD.
Really?
Yeah, they're seen as too radical,
Interesting.
especially their economic policies.
Hmm.
I mean, there was a study by the Institute of German Economics that said that most economists see the AFD's policies as being pretty risky
Oh, wow.
for the economy.
So even though they won a significant chunk of the vote, they're basically sidelined because of their economic policies.
Right.
Interesting.
So that leaves the CDU scrambling to find partners.
Okay.
The most likely outcome is probably going to be a grand coalition between the CDU and the center-left SPD,
Okay.
but even that has its own set of challenges.
Like what?
Well, a lot of experts are worried that it could lead to political gridlock.
Oh, so kind of like what happened when Angela Merkel was in charge.
Yeah, exactly.
Lots of talk, but not always a lot of action.
Right.
And with the economy in such a precarious state, they really can't afford to just be stuck in gridlock.
No, they need a government that can make tough decisions and act decisively.
Yeah.
You know, there were some other possibilities like a CDU Green coalition or a CDU FDP coalition, but those aren't really on the table anymore.
Gotcha.
And, another big thing is, even if they do form this grand coalition, they still won't have a supermajority in the parliament.
Okay.
So any big decisions that need a supermajority vote, like, for example, changing the debt brake.
Hold on. What is this debt brake?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It sounds pretty important.
It's basically a rule that limits how much debt the German government can take on.
Oh, okay.
It's supposed to keep their finances in check.
Okay.
But it also makes it really hard to spend money on things like infrastructure or social programs,
Yeah.
especially when they need a supermajority to make changes.
So it's like a financial safety net, but it could also tie their hands when they need to make big investments.
Exactly.
Which seems like they're going to need to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Okay. So that definitely adds another layer of complexity to this whole situation.
It really does. And we also have to remember that even though the AFD isn't going to be part of the government, their success in this election is already having a real impact.
So it's not just about who's actually in power, but the overall political climate that's been shaped by this election?
Exactly.
Okay, so what kind of impact are we talking about?
Well, businesses are starting to get really worried about attracting skilled workers from abroad.
That makes sense.
With the AFD's rise, it's making Germany seem a lot less welcoming to people from different backgrounds.
Yeah, if a party with really strong anti-immigration views suddenly gets a lot of support, it could definitely make potential immigrants think twice about moving there.
Right. And the numbers really back this up. Almost half of business leaders are saying that they're having trouble recruiting in areas where the AFD is strong. And there's even data showing that people who already live in Germany, people with immigrant backgrounds, are even considering leaving because of this rise in right-wing populism.
Wow, that's significant.
It is, yeah.
So we have businesses struggling to attract talent, potentially losing the skilled workers they already have. And all of this is happening against a backdrop of recession and political uncertainty. This is like a perfect storm brewing in Germany.
Yeah, it's definitely a cause for concern. But I think it might be helpful to kind of shift gears for a moment and talk about how the markets are reacting to all of this.
Okay.
You might be surprised to hear that the initial reaction was actually somewhat positive.
Positive.
Yeah.
With all this turmoil going on.
I know it's kind of unexpected, but right after the election, the DAX, which is Germany's main stock index, actually went up.
Huh.
Defense stocks in particular did well. Investors are kind of betting that a CDU-led government will probably mean more military spending.
Oh, so at least some people are seeing a potential silver lining in all of this.
Yeah, but, the question is whether that optimism is going to last.
Yeah, with all the economic challenges that we've been talking about.
Right. And historically, the DAX has done okay under grand coalitions,
Okay.
but there's just a lot of uncertainty this time around, especially about how things are going to play out with the U.S. in terms of trade.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
And then we can't forget about the possibility of President Trump being reelected.
Yeah.
His trade policies are always a bit of a wild card.
Yeah, the U.S.-Germany trade relationship is a big deal, and with someone like Trump potentially back in the White House, things could get even more unpredictable.
Absolutely.
So speaking of unpredictability, what about the German economy itself? Like, what are the experts saying needs to happen to get things back on track?
Well, they're basically sending a clear message to the new government.
Which is?
Act fast and make some big changes.
Okay.
They want a government that's ready to tackle Germany's industrial decline head-on.
Wow. So no more kicking the can down the road.
Right? Less bureaucracy, tax reforms, investment in infrastructure, digitalization, education. The list goes on and on.
Sounds like they're calling for a complete overhaul, not just a few little tweaks here and there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And on top of that, experts are saying that politicians need to have an honest conversation with the public about some tough choices.
Like what?
Well, they've got to figure out how to handle the aging population and the need for infrastructure improvements.
Yeah.
And that basically means either working longer or taking on more debt.
Neither of which are easy sells.
No, not at all.
So it's like they're walking a tightrope trying to balance all these different needs and pressures.
Exactly.
Okay, well, let's get back to the business leaders for a second.
Mm-hmm.
What specifically are they saying that the government should do?
They're really emphasizing the need for decisive reforms and a break from this political gridlock that's been holding the economy back.
Okay.
They're calling for compromise, a focus on long-term solutions, not just quick fixes,
Right.
and a willingness to really shake things up.
So it's not just about what they do, but how they do it.
Exactly.
Okay. And what about the unions? What's their take on all of this?
Well, unsurprisingly, they're pushing for investments that benefit workers and policies that support strong businesses.
Okay.
This probably means revisiting that debt break we talked about
Yeah.
and finding ways to fund those investments.
It's a tough balancing act.
It really is.
Trying to make everyone happy while also working within the limits of a tight budget.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's kind of zoom out for a moment and talk about the global context. How is all of this playing out on the international stage?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
As we discussed, Germany is a major player in the global economy. So their struggles have ripple effects that extend far beyond their borders.
Right.
Their internal challenges could have significant consequences for international trade financial markets, global economic stability.
It's not just a domestic issue, it's a global issue.
Exactly what happens in Germany affects us all.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to pay attention to what's happening there.
Absolutely.
We need to understand how these developments might impact our own countries and our own economies.
Right. We can't afford to ignore what's happening in Germany, even if it feels far away.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we're all connected in this globalized world.
We are.
All right, so we've explored a lot today. We've talked about the challenges, the potential solutions, the domestic pressures, and the global implications. Now I'd love to hear your thoughts, dear listener.
Yeah?
What's standing out to you as the most significant takeaway from this deep dive so far?
It really is kind of fascinating to watch this whole dance between like the politics and the economic pressures and just the everyday anxieties of German citizens,
Yeah, it feels like the choices they make in the next few months are going to have a lasting impact.
Yeah, for sure. Not just on Germany either, but possibly on the global stage as well.
Yeah, so before we get too deep into those global implications, let's bring it back to Germany for a second. What exactly are these economic challenges that the new government's going to have to tackle?
Well, the article highlights a few key issues.
Yeah.
First, Germany's facing really high costs for businesses,
Okay.
which makes it tougher for them to compete internationally.
Right.
Second, their exports to China, which is one of their biggest trading partners, are declining.
Yeah.
And then you've got the constant threat of tariffs from the U.S., which would really hurt German businesses.
So it's like they're being squeezed from all sides.
Yeah.
High costs at home, shrinking markets abroad, and then the looming possibility of trade wars.
Right.
Not exactly a recipe for economic growth.
No.
But aside from these kind of external pressures, What are some of the internal challenges that Germany's going to need to address?
Well, one of the biggest ones is that debt brake we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
It really restricts the government's ability to spend money on things that are crucial for long-term economic growth, like infrastructure, education, research, and development.
So it's like they have this financial straitjacket on.
Yeah.
They know they need to invest in these areas, but their hands are tied by this rule.
Exactly.
Is there any talk about changing the debt brake?
There has been some discussion,
Okay.
but it's a really tough sell politically.
Yeah.
Remember, they need a supermajority to change it.
Right.
And that's not looking very likely right now. So the new government might have to get a little creative and find alternative ways to finance these investments.
So if changing the rules is off the table, they're going to have to think outside the box.
Yeah.
Are there any ideas floating around about how they might do that?
Well, actually, there is one pretty interesting idea that's been gaining some traction,
What's that?
using increased defense spending as a way to stimulate the economy.
Oh, that's interesting. So instead of just viewing defense spending as a purely military expense, they're looking at its potential to give the economy a boost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like hitting two birds with one stone.
Yeah.
It could address those security concerns and the economic challenges at the same time.
Interesting.
Of course, it's not without its critics,
Of course.
but it's definitely a conversation starter.
Yeah, it sounds like they're going to need all the creative solutions they can get.
For sure.
But going back to those business leaders, what are they saying about how the government should actually approach these economic reforms?
Well, they're really pushing for decisive action and a willingness to break free from that political gridlock that we've been talking about.
Okay.
They want a government that's willing to compromise, focus on those long-term solutions,
Right.
and take some bold steps to modernize the economy.
So it's not enough to just kind of tinker around the edges.
Yeah,
They need to be willing to make some fundamental changes.
exactly.
But what about the other side of the coin? What are the unions saying about all of this?
Well, as you might expect, the unions are calling for policies that protect workers and strengthen businesses.
Okay.
They're pushing for investments in things like job training infrastructure to social programs.
Gotcha.
They argue that these investments will ultimately benefit everyone in the long run.
Okay, so it sounds like both business leaders and unions agree that the government needs to step up and take action, even if they maybe have different ideas about the specifics.
Right.
So let's zoom out for a moment and talk about the global context. And how is all of this playing out on the international stage?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting, as we discussed earlier. Germany is a major player in the global economy.
Right.
So their struggles have ripple effects that extend far beyond their borders.
Right.
These internal challenges could have significant consequences for international trade financial markets, global economic stability.
So it's not just a domestic issue, it's a global issue.
Exactly what happens in Germany affects us all.
And that's why it's so important to pay attention to what's happening there. We need to understand how these developments might impact our own countries and economies.
Right. We can't afford to ignore what's happening in Germany, even if it feels far away.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we're all connected in this globalized world.
We are.
Okay, so we've explored the challenges, the potential solutions, the domestic pressures, and the global implications. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts, dear listener. What's standing out to you as the most significant takeaway from this deep dive so far?
Yeah, it really is a lot to think about. We've talked about the political shakeup, the economic anxieties, the global ripple effects.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like Germany's at a real crossroads,
Yeah.
facing some tough decisions that are really going to shape their future.
Yeah, the stakes couldn't be higher. I mean, the choices they make in these next few months,
Yeah.
they're not just going to determine their own economic fate,
Hmm.
but they could have like a huge impact on the global balance of power.
So no pressure.
Right.
But speaking of that global picture, let's talk about those ripple effects for a minute.
Yeah.
How could Germany's struggles impact the rest of the world? Well, if their economy keeps faltering, it could actually slow down growth across Europe and even further afield. We could see a decline in global trade,
Oh, wow.
volatility in the financial markets, maybe even some political instability in other countries.
So a weakening Germany could create like a domino effect,
It's possible.
destabilizing other economies, creating a lot of uncertainty on the world stage.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important for other countries, for businesses, even for individuals,
Yeah.
to pay attention to what's happening in Germany.
Right.
Understanding the potential risks, the challenges,
Mm-hmm.
can help us all prepare for any economic shocks that might be coming our way.
So it's not just about watching Germany's story unfold, it's about understanding how their story might intersect with our own.
Exactly.
Okay, well, let's bring it back to the heart of the matter for a sec. What are the most likely scenarios that we could see play out in Germany over the next few months?
Okay, well, one possibility is that the CDU manages to form a stable coalition government,
Okay.
maybe with the SPD, and they start to implement some of these much-needed economic reforms.
Okay.
If they can find a way to kind of break through the political gridlock and make some tough decisions,
Mm-hmm.
there's a chance they could turn things around.
So there's hope for a positive outcome,
There is.
but it really hinges on their ability to form a cohesive government
Yes,
and act decisively.
absolutely. But there's also the possibility that those political divisions are just too deep
Yeah.
and they end up stuck in gridlock.
Right.
If they can't agree on a clear path forward, the economic situation could get worse,
Right.
leading to more uncertainty, maybe even some social unrest.
So we've got two very different paths here.
Yeah.
One leading towards stability and recovery, the other towards further instability and potentially even crisis.
Right. And let's not forget about that wild card of U.S. trade policy.
Oh, yeah, especially if President Trump is reelected.
Exactly.
His approach to trade could really throw another wrench in the works.
It really could.
Make it even harder for Germany to stabilize their economy. It's like they're trying to navigate a minefield,
Yeah.
and there's no way to predict where that next explosion might come from.
Right.
So with all of this uncertainty hanging over Germany, what's the overall mood? Like, are people feeling optimistic? Are they pessimistic about the future?
Well, the IFO Business Climate Index, which measures business confidence, is still pretty low.
Okay.
So that suggests that a lot of businesses are still feeling pretty cautious.
Right.
But there's also some signs of resilience
Okay.
and this determination to overcome these challenges. You know, the German people have faced difficult times before,
They have.
and they've always found a way to bounce back.
So it's a mixed bag then.
Yeah.
Apprehension and hope.
Uh-huh.
A sense that the road ahead's going to be bumpy, but they have the strength to weather the storm.
I think that's a really good way to put it. It's a fascinating moment in history.
Yeah.
It'll be really interesting to see how it all unfolds. But I think the most important takeaway for our listeners is that this isn't just a story about Germany. This is a story about how interconnected the global economy really is.
Yeah.
And the challenges that we all face in a world that's constantly changing.
Yeah. It's a story that highlights how important it is to stay informed, stay engaged, and maybe even be a little proactive.
Yeah, because what happens in Germany, or really anywhere else in the world, could have a ripple effect that reaches our own shores.
Absolutely. And that's why we do what we do here on the Deep Dive,
That's right.
to help you understand these complex issues and make sense of the world around you.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the aftermath of the German election, we'd love to leave you with something to ponder.
Yeah.
Think about those two potential paths that we discussed, one towards stability, the other towards further uncertainty.
Right.
Which path do you think Germany is more likely to take?
Yeah.
And what are you most curious to see unfold in the coming months?
Good questions.
Keep those questions in mind as you follow the news. And remember, the story's still being written.
It is.